All right, let's get into some qualification practices for tenants. So, so this list here is kind of what I would consider the minimum that you would need to properly qualify a tenant. Um, of course, you need to have an application that's fully completed. Um, and it's amazing how many clients we have come in here and they don't even have the tenant's application information. Sometimes because it was like such a long time ago. Maybe maybe they've had tenants back before scanners even existed. Um, but you got to have your application and I'll share with you a story and why I don't like using what is it? I think Zillow will qualify, do credit checks for you, some of the other online platforms. Here's a problem with that. And this particular lady, um, so they had a difficult time during COVID where their tenants were taking advantage of the situation there, and she had to evict them. And that's when they brought us on board. But before then, these people they applied through, I believe it was through Zillow, I believe. So Zillow's got their third party, set up there for applying. But there was an issue over there at this particular with these tenants that she brought in there. One guy kind of, I guess lost his mind or something, and it escalated into a whole SWAT team situation where, the SWAT team came in there, you know, fully armed, and we're just hurling at canisters of gas or whatever. I mean, just a crazy scene. I wasn't there, but they did tons of damage in there, and so she had a tricky time going after those tenants. Those tenants obviously they vacated, they left, and but she tried to go after them for the damages. She had a tricky time because Zillow did not provide them the social security numbers on their applications. So it made it a little trickier for her legal team, to garnish their wages or go after them. Um, so that's just something to think about there if you're using these third party application systems. Want to have their photo ID. Some people, if you tell them you require photo ID, they might not even apply because they might have some questionable things in their background. If they got a social security card, that's great to have. Some people, it's actually advised not to carry your social security card because that could lead to identity theft. Um, Income documents, um, we recommend getting at least 3 months of income docs, whether it's paycheck stubs or bank statements. Um, and then get your credit and background check done. Have a vendor that does that for you. Now in California, they made it more difficult with our vendor. You can't They won't actually allow the credit check process to include criminal history anymore. So now you have to dig a little deeper and go into the different criminal background portals. You can't just do it together with the credit check portals there. Tenancy verification, you want to reach out to their existing property manager or landlord and just verify that they live there and see what kind of feedback they tell you, whether they pay on time. And you might even be surprised and find out that they're in the process of getting evicted. uh, that has happened, and that's an automatic disqualification there. Employment verification, um, that all comes down to calling up their HR department or their supervisor or whoever it is, and putting the time and energy to do that. So all this stuff, all this stuff takes time. Calling people, and sometimes you don't find them, you have to follow up. But it's very necessary to properly qualify your prospective tenants.
Yeah, and when you're also doing your qualifications, Sometimes, the property owner or us as a property management will make decisions as far as, two times the rent or three times the rent as a qualification. Or Omar and I, we like to use a rent to income ratio where we actually take out the living expenses from their credit report. So, if say for example they've got $15,000 in credit card debt, and we see what their minimum payments are, we're able to subtract that from their net income to get the rent to income ratio more accurate, because we want to make sure that the tenants also not are only paying for rent, but that they can pay for their food, they can pay for their gas, they can pay for their entertainment, they can pay for additional living expenses beyond the rent. And of course, in California, where it's easy to find a rental for say $3,000 or $4,000 a month, to say okay, three times rent, you got to be taking home $12,000 a month. Yeah, you're going to be a well qualified individual, and there's plenty of them out there. But if you have you make the decision as a property owner that you're willing to say, hey, two times, so maybe the tenants or the prospect, the applicant is only earning say $8,000, as long as they are able to afford the rent and have enough for their, like I said, those other additional living expenses, then you can go ahead and use that as a qualifying factor. And where are they working? How long have they been with their employer? As Omar had mentioned in the last slide, we do the verification, but a lot of the applicants that work for big companies, like say for example like Walmart or some other like big company, then we have to utilize a third party like that's run through the credit bureaus to do employment verification. And so it's very important, that we have, the proper name and ID, because as we're going to talk about later on in the scams part of the presentation, some people just don't, give us accurate information. And that's where the tenancy verification comes in. As For those of you that weren't here at the beginning, before we started, we had the networking, and Janice was even talking about she has some property managers that actually drive to the applicant's current resident location, just to do a verification and kind of see how well they're taking care of their own property. But we just want to make sure with the landlord that they're living wherever they're living right now, that they're paying on time. And usually it starts with just a communication, a telephone call. We email over, a list of questions, and oftentimes they'll just print it out and fill it out by hand, and then they'll just scan it and email it back to us, and then that way we have a response that's documented, and that kind of goes back to the whole systemization.
Yeah, the only thing I want to mention on this one here is on the income qualifier. We always use the net income. Some people use the gross, but we use the net. And that's what we suggest you folks do as well. It does take extra work because some people's net income fluctuates, from one paycheck to the next. So what you have to do, you have to average it out. They're giving you 3 months of income statements. You have to average out that data to kind of figure out where it all stands. But that's what we recommend you guys
And
work with.
I will also say this, that whatever system or rule that you're using, it's very important that you have a list of the qualification criteria and that you stick with it. Because if you say, hey, you know, applicant X is getting, two times the rent, and then applicant Y, you tell them it's three times, that's discrimination. You cannot do that.
Yeah, you can
And
get in trouble for that.
so that's why you need to have your qualification criteria written down, and that you make sure that you follow it. so that you don't get accused of discriminating against somebody because you have a system in place and you're using the same rules for everybody.
Yeah, there's actually what they call testers out there. You know, the government agency that does that kind of stuff. They're called HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and they've been known to, they'll they'll ask certain questions, and if you do something that's um, you change your parameters for somebody else, yeah, that can get you in trouble. You can have a housing claim against you. And then, you might have to take some extra classes or whatever, so just make sure you keep everybody, you do the same qualifying for everybody out there, and don't try to play favorites out there. Um, one thing that just came to mind also on the employment verification is, whereas the second bullet point, how long with are they with their current employer? And I just wanted to share with you guys, one of the things that, many years ago we changed and implemented that um, changed for the better, um, um, our collection of rentals. And I don't remember exactly. I, I think it was in 2013, I believe, Jeffrey, when we bought that. We purchased this. It was a 13 unit complex out there in the Inland Empire, and this was early on in our investing careers. And when we first took it over, we had to virtually almost get rid of everybody there. I think the only person we didn't get rid of was a lady that was on Section 8 there. Um, but we went through several rounds of evictions. So we brought in tenants, you know, qualifying them, like we thought, qualifying them properly. And then we had to come back around and evict people all over again. And so that's when I decided to do kind of a deep dive there. That's where my analytical side kind of came out and said, okay, what is going on there? Is there a flaw in how we're qualifying people? And so here's what I discovered in that process. So I pulled out the applicant files and just, went through them, just pretty much just did a file audit, like I would do back in my aerospace times, to try to find consistencies. And there were two things that I found out, but what wound up being the actual issue was the amount of time that people were with their employers. Now, keep this in mind. This was back in 2013. And at that time, the economy was not the same as it is, nowadays, or, even years after that. The economy uh, was still kind of recovering. It wasn't a recovery. And so there was definitely a lot more people looking for jobs than there were jobs available. And so, employers had the advantage there. And and I've had to hire and fire people, so I understood that side of it. But the common issue that we found there was that everybody that we had to evict had been with their employer for less than 1 year. And so when I kind of, thought about that, it kind of it I kind of saw a connection. Whereas if you've ever had to hire and fire people, um, it takes a little while before you come to the conclusion that this particular employee is going to work out for the long haul. And if it turns out that an employee is not going to work out, well, sometimes they'll wind up sticking around the company for several months, maybe even, you know, over half a year, before an employer finally decides that, hey, this person's not working out. I'm just going to fire them and find somebody else. Because back in those days, it was easier to find, more employees out there because, the economy was still recovering. People were still, looking for work out there. There was a lot of unemployment. And and so that was a change that we did. So now we required people that were going to apply, we required them to have at least a 1 year working history with their current employer. Because if you have an employee, they've been with you for at least a year, okay, then it's pretty good that, that employee is worked out and, you're gonna keep them around. But if they've been with you less than a year, they're still kind of in that probation period where it's like, especially if they're kind of, marginal employees, you might consider replacing them. And so once we did that change, requiring a 1 year work history, it was like everything changed there. Our evictions, virtually disappeared. And I mean, and even to this day, that's over 10 years ago. Now it's like 12 years ago. Even to this day, we have very little evictions. The people that we do evict wind up being people that we inherit from landlords that hire us because they didn't properly qualify their tenants and now they need our help to clean up their messes.